She will be the first speaker. She's from India. Then it will be, and I hope I pronounce my name right, Tinus Kruger. And then it will be Maher Maghrabi, who's from Australia, from Sydney. And because he has to leave early, he will form part of this session. And I think let's jump right in. Okay.
Okay. All right. So as it's quite evident, Namaste from India. So I'm Dr. Manjari Kapoor, traveled all the way from India to talk to you about something which is, luckily, as I find today, in keeping with what is the note set by our esteemed keynote speaker, Alain. And it finds resonance in that. And I hope that I would be able to add merit to bring a new kind of flavor to the discussion happening today. So, so the topic, I mean, of course, we all know that communities are vital to Cpted, especially from the second generation perspective, but also from the third generation perspective, as it brings in the aspects of neighborhood hierarchies and things like that. Homogeneity and heterogeneity, or homogeneity versus heterogeneity of communities, is something that architects, urban designers, planners have been debating for as long as I know the subject. But what I'm going to focus on here is the role of culture and socioeconomics in Cpted, and in the special context of developing economies like India. So basically what I'm trying to get at is that these factors impact the constitution of communities, and communities is what makes up neighborhoods, and neighborhoods is what makes up cities. So in the specific context and representative almost of a third world country, India is my sample here. So we already know that first generation Cpted has been working for centuries, but a lot of you may not know that it's been working in the traditional garb of culture and a lot of heritage and a lot of good practices, not known yet in India as much in the garb of Cpted. Second generation we find in India, sorry, that's a little early. Second generation we find in India is the main driver of the first generation principles, not so much design and architecture that knowledge is yet to kind of percolate down. Also in the third generation, when we're looking at the proposals for third generation which are being debated nowadays, there is a big emphasis on sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability in the context of developing economies, socioeconomics is probably a most important factor. And further, the other proposals for third generation like public health and neighborhood livability, all of these finally come down to how a community is constituted, how the neighborhoods are being made at the city level. So that is what brings in the idea of homogeneous versus heterogeneous communities. Now let's look at first and foremost let's understand the difference between homogeneous and heterogeneous. So as we know, homogeneous is obviously something that has a similarity in structure, it has some kind of a commonality, and that is exactly what basically amounts to being homogeneous. Heterogeneous, obviously, then is exactly the opposite of that, where you have dissimilar or incongruous or a diversity of sorts, and that is what we're talking about when we talk about heterogeneous. So what you're looking at right now is a map of the world which shows the concentration of the Indian communities across the world. Now you can see that you can see that from the legend here, you can see that Indians do find favor in the North America and of course some part of the Gulf, followed by a little bit on Australia, yes, South Africa too, and the rest of the world, of course, less. But what does that mean? What do you mean when you talk about the Indian community? The Indian community itself is a very diverse community. It's supposed to be one of the most closest communities, close-knit communities across the world, very thick, very hardworking, or such sweeping statements are made about us. But actually, we are one of the most diverse communities or diverse countries in the world. We have 7 major recognized religions, over 1,600 languages, and over 2,000 ethnic groups within that Indian community, what you just saw. So, what does that mean? So, nationality is one factor that we talk about when we talk about homogeneity versus heterogeneity. But is that really it? Actually, I could think of these. I'm sure there are many, many more factors, but things like race, color, ethnicity, nationality, we just talked about that, religion, caste, language, culture, even food and traditions are all factors or parameters on which one can judge the homogeneity or the heterogeneity of a community. So, amongst these, the one which is least mentioned and written about is socioeconomics. And for me, according to me, in the context of developing economies, it's probably the most important. So, even when we talk about it's linked to Cpted, probably socioeconomics is very, very significant from all the first generation and the second generation principles. Previous case studies and my book with some of the case studies show how socioeconomic classifications has a distinct impact on all of these factors that we attribute to Cpted today. Now, in the specific context of India, where 95% of the 1.4 billion people, which means approximately, if you calculated 1.33 billion people, are in the lower income or below poverty line group. That's on your screen, that's data. That's a huge number. And you cannot have a discussion on anything without understanding this major statistic. Now, in that regard, I was very enthused when I had visited the Sydney Technical University in 2016, and I learned of this project that they were doing they were doing it with 2 communities around Sydney area, one of which was the Campsie project. And this was being done basically by urban designers to understand the difference between heterogeneity and the impact, of course, on crime reduction versus homogeneity. Now, typically, urban designers across the world believe in the virtues of inclusion and that any community should not be, typecasted, and they should be included, and there should be as much heterogeneity in a group, right? This project was the first time where they put together, people coming from for asylum seekers. Let's just say asylum seekers. They were put together, and this community was developed principally for people from, the same or similar backgrounds. They were allowed to stay, live together, settle down, and they found great dividends in their community policing, in the way they could manage these, the community which was typically blamed for crime activities. They found a certain amount of control factor in that. So, of course, this was a very, very, should we say, successful experiment. which shows that yes, maybe homogeneity is what works well against crime. So similarly, we've seen, I mean, I'm sure all of you, from whichever part of the world you come, you know that Indians, Chinese, and so on and so forth, different races across the world tend to settle down into homogeneous communities wherever they go. So wherever you go, there would be a Chinatown, there would be a Little India, or some equivalent of that. So one would imagine that this is the way, this is the natural way, this is the obvious way, and this is probably the right way. And maybe the comfort of settling together with sharing and caring for each other, logistical support, and all those in a strange land. But we also find that settlements like these have today become tools of politics and play of power and ideologies. I'll give you an example of that. You see the video? I'll just pause it for a second, just 1 second. I'll give you an introduction so that you know what we're talking about. So this video is of a homogeneous settlement somewhere in India, and this is when the COVID health workers, this is in the early days of COVID, when the health workers were going door to door from community to community, trying to identify people who may be carrying the disease and may not be knowing. And it was the misuse of the power of a community where the leaders of the community led the people to believe that these people who are coming in these PPE suits, you know, so those PPE suits were equated to something like a monster or a demon, and they're going to come, they're going to examine you and take you away, and you may never ever come back. And this was palmed off, and you will see how the community has reacted to people coming to help them. And this is an example of the misuse of the power of a community, especially a homogeneous community. So as you can see, the people with the PPE kits are being attacked and stoned and made to go back without, conducting what they had come for. Okay, I think that's enough. So, gated communities, we've all argued about them, debated, they are another example. They are, however, an example of homogeneous but socio-economically homogeneous communities. So people of a particular economic class come together, learn to, decide to live together and disallow everybody else from coming there. Similarly, and we of course saw that during the pandemic, these were the communities which struggled with a lot of things, though their lockdown protocols and their hardening was very, very good, but it was on a socio-economic level that they suffered. And of course, the picture on your screen, I wonder if so many of you are aware of, these are the lowest marginalized class of the Indian population, forced to walk back home during the long days or long weeks of lockdown because they had no option. They had no way to survive. And this is what pushes us today to understand that probably we need to rethink, just pretty much like what Alain had argued for, maybe these systems are now obsolete and we need to rethink the system in how we plan our cities. So this is an example of a traditional community, residential community in India, in Delhi, which is, say, representative of most of the traditional cities. And you have, of course, sorry, I lost the page. Yeah. So you have a lot of people staying together, working together. Now, this is an example of that, the same traditional homogeneous community, which was designed Originally, if you see, these are the Richie Rich blocks, if I may call them so, I'm sorry. And these were the middle class groups. So you can see that this is 800 to 1,000 square yards, and these are about 200 to 300. Now, what has happened over the years is that this classification has got diluted. So we have a veritable mix now, because the very same one single plot which earlier housed a single rich individual is now probably having 6 middle class families in the apartment form, and so on and so forth on the other side. So because of which now this has become a little more vibrant, and even though this is at what somebody would say at the cost of snoot value, it does serve the purpose of Cpted way better than what it was. Similarly, in this picture, this is the same colony that you saw in the master plan. This is this neighborhood park, and so in this, if you see, you have the original residents who are the higher income group ladies. They are doing their activities, while their lower income group support people have as much access to the same public health spaces. It's mixed use not just in terms of the purpose of the buildings, but also in terms of the socioeconomic group that is covered here. And it is in sharp contrast, if you see, to these kind of lower socioeconomic group colonies versus these rich enclaves. Now, these rich enclaves have all the workings of an advanced level neighborhood. They have everything that you can ask for. But what they don't do is contribute to the city, to the neighborhood, to the people in any which way. So this, basically what we've discussed here are the merits and demerits of homogeneous versus heterogeneous communities. And as you can see, this is again that same community, and you can see people from children of all economic groups having equal access, equitability in all possible ways. So this is, according to me, a very important aspect, and it also lines up with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I won't go into each one of them because we are pressed for time. Let me just end on this. So similarly, what I'm trying to get at is that this subject, this probably requires closer research, closer inquiry, and assimilation into the mainstream to give socio-economics as much importance in our planning and Cpted activities as maybe culture and all the other virtues get. So this is a picture of my book, which is in final stages of publication. It has a lot of full case studies on the subjects that I kind of just mentioned here. You could always use them, and I would like to close with that. Many, many thanks. Dhanyavad. Obrigado.